Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our IDAHOBIT 2020 community event. We're doing an online Q&A for the community today to mark this important date. Now, before I begin, for those who might be needing our AUSLAN interpreters this afternoon, we've got two AUSLAN interpreters who will be assisting us. You should be able to see them on the screen at the same time as our current speaker. If there are any problems with that though, please let us know via the Q&A function in Zoom and we'll get onto that for you. Now, in order to begin the event, I would first of all like to acknowledge that we all come from the traditional lands of different Aboriginal peoples throughout Australia. But for those of us who are in Adelaide, I would like to welcome Jack Buckskin to provide us with a welcome to country. Over to you, Jack.
All right, there we go. I think I'm on. Firstly, those that don't know me, my name is Jack. I represent three different Aboriginal groups of South Australia. One being Kaurna of the Adelaide Plains here, Narungga from the Yorke Peninsula, and the Wirrung from Streaky Bay Sajuna area. Also acknowledge my dad when I do these things. He's Italian and Scottish, but obviously helped make me for who I am. But I get the opportunity to welcome people, acknowledge country in my mother tongue language, and being Kaurna, and I'm situated on Kaurna country. I acknowledge this place, the ancestors and elders within this land. It's a little bit different, something like this, a virtual welcome to country, but sort of fits in with what we do, what our welcoming process is about. We welcome guests into different lands and when we gather in different places, but it's the essence of it is welcoming people spiritually. So as I welcome and acknowledge country that I stand on, I ask people to acknowledge and pay respects to the place that you stand on, whether it's touching country, talking to it, and just letting ancestors know that live within the lands, that we're still here and that we're here not to disturb country. So even though it's virtually, it fits in to the bigger picture about our culture, which is welcoming guests spiritually onto country. Physically, we can't be in each other's presence, but spiritually, our spirits still live with us within the lands that we are gathering on or living on. Introducing myself again, my Aboriginal name is Ganya Pundundawitpin Kudnawitcha. Breaks up into three smaller names. Ganya, it's the rock, it's my totem. Pundundawitpin means the father of the dragonfly. We actually derive our name from our children. And Kudnawitcha tells you that I'm third born in my family. So Ganya Pundundawitpin Kudnawitcha is how I say my name. Now, also in acknowledging country, I also pay respects to other Aboriginal people, other Aboriginal lands that we live in. So Maningadlu Tampandi Ngadlu Garnia Tanga Tikandi, Yajiatangaru Tandaganya Takandi, Kumri Yajimina, Kumri Pindamina, Yajiatanga Tikandi, Mining and Punding Adlukuyatana. So that's just acknowledging all the ancestors and elders from different lands. I am just paying respect to the ancestors of the country that I'm living in, but also to other Aboriginal people that live and breathe a part of our country, welcoming and paying respects to those people. Marawachang ngadlu ko bukyana borkana kumgani mini yalara ngadlu wangandi mani burning ngadlu ko yata ngadlu ko tualan ngadlu wangandi. So I, on behalf of Kaurna people, I get the opportunity to welcome you to the country, but in this case, I'll be welcoming you spiritually, and in a spiritual form to country. Ngadlu ko yungandalia kanandalia. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and do that. But yati yata la panima ngadlu ko mukabanga yata tuala. So I acknowledge country. I thank you for allowing me to be a part of this, but I also ask you to pay respects to our country, our ancestors and our elders. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, and I hope that you and your family are keeping well during these interesting times. So again, for those of you who are just joining us, thank you for joining us for IDAHOBIT 2020. My name is Matt. I'm here on behalf of the South Australian Rainbow Advocacy Alliance, or SARAA for short, and together with the Department of Human Services, or DHS, I'm glad that we can be bringing you this event. In previous years, some of you may have attended the breakfasts that DHS has hosted for IDAHOBIT, and there's a little bit of a backstory about this event. DHS asked us last year if we would be interested in hosting this year's event to effectively give a bit more of the control of it to the LGBTIQ plus community itself. So I'm delighted that we can be doing this, and I thank DHS for their ongoing support. So today is IDAHOBIT, the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, Intersexphobia and Transphobia. And while it's a mouthful, it's important to spell out all those parts. It's important as well to recognise it's an international day. So we're acknowledging the ongoing impact of all of those attitudes all around the world, as well as right here in South Australia. Through today's event, you'll have the chance to hear from a few speakers. We've got a Q&A panel looking at today's theme, or the theme for IDAHOBIT 2020, which is breaking the silence, which can mean different things for different people. And we hope, well, I'm sure that our panelists will give us a chance to explore that in a few different ways. You'll have the opportunity to ask questions of your own as we go through. But in addition to our Q&A, we also have two guest speakers, one before and one after the Q&A. So in the interest of trying to jump through to the Q&A as quickly as possible, because I know that's why you're all here, I'm going to go straight into introducing our first guest. It's been a tradition at the IDAHOBIT breakfast every year for the Minister for Human Services to speak. And even though we've moved from DHS hosting it to SARAA, there's no need to break with that tradition. Michelle Lensink, MLC, has been the Minister for Human Services in South Australia since 2018. She spoke at last year's IDAHOBIT breakfast, and in a second, it'll give me great pleasure to welcome her to our virtual stage. But before I do, I would also like to acknowledge other politicians who are either joining us today or have sent their apologies. So first of all, and I don't have the attendee list in front of me, but I'm suspecting that Ian Hunter, MLC, and Nat Cook, MP, the member for Hurdle Valley, are both with us today from the Labor Party. Thank you to you both, and Nat as the Shadow Minister for Human Services, thank you very much for being here. Tammy Franks, MLC from the Greens, also hopes to be here for at least part of the event. And Stephen Wade, MLC, the Minister for Human Services, sends his apologies, as does John Dawkins, MLC, the Premier's Advocate for Suicide Prevention. They both wish they could be here today, but had other commitments. Without further ado, though, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Michelle Lensink to say a few words with us.
Oh, hello. Hi, everyone. Happy IDAHOBIT Day. Can I also acknowledge that we meet on the land of the Kaurna people and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and to any elders who may be from other Aboriginal nations. To acknowledge our panellists who you'll be hearing from, and I'm sure what they're going to say is going to be very insightful and very fascinating to assist us with our learning about how we can progress LGBTIQA plus issues, particularly here in South Australia. Can I acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues, to SARAA as well, thank them for their ongoing work in this area, because I think it is just invaluable to have them as partners. They've been incredibly proactive and really professional, and I think have a wonderful working relationship with DHS. As you have to excuse the background noise, I'm here with my 4-year-old. The breakfast, it's disappointing that we couldn't have it this year, but we're all, I guess, adopting to the times and learning to do things differently. So it's fantastic that we're able to do this webinar on this day, which is incredibly important that we continue to celebrate IDAHOBIT Day. Our communities, and Australia's no different to many communities, have struggled with diversity in a range of areas, whether it's racial areas or gender or LGBTIQ issues, a whole range of areas that I think we're all growing and improving at our practices. So it's really important, I think, that we celebrate the gains that have been made and also look to the future in terms of what else we need to be doing differently. So the roundtable was incredibly important to start the conversation with the government, and we're very grateful for everybody who's been part of that process. DHS has been working through a huge list of recommendations in conjunction with a whole range of other agencies. And for those of you who were there, you might remember that a lot of the issues that came up were in other portfolios, such as the health portfolio, in education and in justice areas, as well as in the human services area. So we've been working across all the departments in terms of progressing that report. And I apologise if it's not progressing as fast as all of us would like, but it is a work in progress. I'm pleased that as part of, I think, her own separate process, the public sector agent, Irma Ranieri, has also been working on a strategy herself, which is to include LGBTIQ as a particular cohort that government needs to ensure that it's being inclusive of. Other issues that have come up through the roundtable include safe spaces and how government should be formally consulting into the future. So happy IDAHOBIT Day. I'm sure the panellists are going to be fantastic, and I look forward to progressing the outcomes from the roundtable and other issues as they arise. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Minister. And again, my thanks both to Minister Michelle Lensink and also to DHS for their ongoing work in this space. And once more, I hope and echo Michelle's thoughts that next year we'll be able to meet again in person, but I'm glad that we can still do something this year for IDAHOBIT. So, launching us into the Q&A. So we have 3 wonderful South Australians who are joining us for today's session. They each come from different backgrounds, they each have different levels or different types of expertise. And really, when we were thinking about this year's theme of breaking the silence for IDAHOBIT, it was a bit of a no-brainer that we wanted to have a panel rather than a single speaker. Breaking the silence will definitely mean different things for different people. And for us at SARAA, we thought it was very important to really get a chance to dig deeper into what that means for diverse parts of the LGBTIQ plus community who don't always get a chance to be heard. Before I introduce our panellists, I want to acknowledge that we could have made this a full day event and we still would have only been scratching the surface of the full diversity of our community. So this is by no means a snapshot of everything within the community or all of the issues that are relevant. But I'm hoping that it'll be a chance for us to hear from people relating to a few areas in particular. Very briefly, our 3 panellists today in order are Neha Maddock, Sarah K. Rees, and Zach Cannell. Each of them will speak for between 5 and 10 minutes about their initial thoughts of what breaking the silence means. Then we'll open up for the Q&A. So if you have questions already that you're wanting to submit, there's the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. You can submit questions and we'll be answering them shortly. Our first speaker though, who I'd love to introduce to you and bring to our virtual stage is Neha Maddock. Now, I don't have, actually, sorry, I do have Neha's bio in front of me here. So Neha has over a decade of experience in Australian political campaigning and is driven by a power of grassroots organising to win tangible outcomes for social justice. Currently, Neha is a National Director at Democracy in Colour, the first Australia-wide organisation led by and for people of colour and for economic justice. Previously, she was a senior campaigner at 350.org Australia, and Neha has also worked on the Yes campaign for marriage equality, where she was a digital campaigner, was also a digital campaigner in the Australian Union movement. So Neha, thank you so much for joining us today. And before I jump into what breaking the silence means for you, can I maybe ask for a very quick elevator pitch about Democracy in Colour and the great work that you do?
Sure. So as you've outlined, Democracy in Colour is a racial and economic justice organisation. We work in 2 different ways. So we run a range of campaigns. At the moment, we're working really hard to ensure that migrant workers, international students and temporary visa holders are included in JobSeeker and JobKeeper. We also run a range of programs. So we've got this great thing called a People of Colour Placement Program that places young people of colour into paid traineeships into organisations that or areas of work that may otherwise have a lack of diversity. And we also run training programs so that young people of colour can learn how to become amazing campaigners and advocates out in the world.
Great, thank you for that. So one of the things we were definitely thinking about when we were setting this event up is the impact for LGBTIQ plus people of colour. And I know that in and of itself isn't the core business for Democracy in Colour, but given that your background has involved or included being a part of the marriage equality campaign, why do you think we need to be thinking specifically about the needs of LGBTIQ people of colour when we think about breaking the silence?
Oh, that is a very big question, and I'm quite happy to get into it. Did you want me to go into my, I guess, what I've prepared, or should we have a bit of a question and answer first?
If you've got something prepared, go for it.
Awesome. So I wanted to today share a bit of a story with everyone, and a bit of background on me as well. I grew up in Sydney and actually recently moved to Adelaide. So this story very much takes place in Sydney and has a lot of Sydney references, but I'm sure it will translate as well across boundaries. So I think I want to start by telling everyone a little bit about what it was actually like working on the Yes campaign. In September 2017, I remember sitting in the office of the Yes campaign. I remember being exhausted, but surrounded by people, and by people who I knew were really supportive. And this was at the absolute height of the marriage survey. We'd been working 14-hour days, and my trips to and from the office were essentially passages of rainbow flags. So I would walk from my house in Sydney's inner west, which was quite a sort of LGBTIQ sort of area. And I would walk from my home through a sea of rainbow flags, posters, call flutes, banners, chalk drawings, all so defiantly screaming yes, all the way to the train, catch the train to Barangaroo, which is where the office was. And that part of the city as well was covered in rainbow through to the office. And I would go, oh, wow, so many people in the community really support us. But that's all that I saw for months at a time. I'd also just joined a new racial justice startup, not-for-profit, called Democracy in Colour. At this time, we were absolutely brand new. We weren't more than, I think, a couple of launch events, and we were all volunteers. So when I spoke to my queer friends in Democracy in Colour, I heard a very different story. Carrie was afraid that she would have to come out to her parents, and she didn't know how she would begin having that conversation. Turns out the sort of generic messaging around love is love isn't actually that universal, and it doesn't translate culturally. She didn't know how to literally translate that to her parents. The campaign's frame that we were working on of equality and fairness was something that certainly had some cut through, but it didn't quite cut through to communities of colour. My queer friends at Democracy in Colour all lived in outer Western Sydney. This is where I had also grown up. And it's kind of like, I would say, a bit more like the northern suburbs. It's an area of 2 million people where infrastructure development lags behind population growth, where at your local public school, your desks are held together with chewing gum. And it's where so many Black and brown families are, because it's what they can afford, and it's where your community is. And they were not walking around seeing rainbows emblazoned on every surface like I was. So with no budget and no staff, we decided to launch our own Yes campaign. We launched a crowdfunder and a video, and it very quickly went viral. We talked about family, togetherness, and community, and it was working. While we didn't have the resources to stem the tide of a multi-million-dollar no campaign that had been targeting people in the region for years, we did have an impact. On the day the result came through, I had 2 responses. I was standing backstage in Sydney where the announcement was taking place. I was holding hands with a close friend who is also queer and ethnic, but he was he was afraid to come out to his parents as well. But as the results came through, we were elated. We did it. But then came the analysis. The places that we'd lived, the places we had grown up, had all come back with a very resounding no. It's a cliche, I know, but it's true. My heart sank as my social media feed went from, yes, this is amazing, we've done it, to we need to build a wall. I'm never going west of Parramatta again. Western Sydney is a cesspit, who needs them? And I knew, while the white queers wouldn't say it openly, we knew what they meant, that brown people aren't like us. I wasn't surprised, because this isn't a new problem. It's a story as old as colonialism. To give you a very quick and loose summary, I promise this is not a history lesson, and I don't have my dates in front of me, but hundreds of years ago, rich monarchs from Spain, Portugal, and England decided to discover new lands for trade and for ownership. In the interests of growing their wealth, they pillaged, stole, violently destroyed cultures, civilizations, and people. One of the most famous examples is the British Raj. England ruled over South Asia for over 200 years, a region where, like many other cultures around the world, there was acceptance. There were roles for LGBTIQ people. Queen Victoria outlawed homosexuality in India, and only, I think, maybe 2017, 2018, did that law change. Colonization was established to line the pockets of the wealthy, and they still reap the benefits of it today. Now communities of colour and queer people are divided. Those of us who fit into both of those categories aren't seen as being part of the same community, and many of us feel like they need to choose. Many of us live hidden or completely separate lives, taking one part of ourselves away in order to be another part of ourselves. But together we can change this, and it starts by decolonising queer spaces. I really believe that that change can happen, and I really believe that we can come together and that we can come past our history, we can learn from it, and we can create something new.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Neha. So much to unpack there, but one of the key themes that I hope our audience, and regardless of whether our audience are part of the LGBTIQ plus community, maybe work in a service supporting the community, or are perhaps allies in the community just in general, I think it's really key for people to pick up on the point that you made there, that the experiences of LGBTIQ plus people of colour aren't necessarily the same as what white LGBTIQ people might experience. And I think it's really key for us to really be moving beyond our own personal experiences and looking at those different experiences. And you even picked on that point about how people in the suburbs weren't having the same experience as what you had gone through within your position working in the campaign. Now, I'm mindful that there will no doubt be extra questions, and I can see a couple have come in already. So I might pose one last question to you before we move on to our next speaker. So breaking the silence, today is IDAHOBIT, so let's not forget the international part of it. What do we need to be mindful of here in Australia about that on an international level?
That is a great question. I think we need to be mindful of our place in the world where we sit. We are part of the Asia Pacific, and Australia is a leader in that space. Where we're currently a nation that also is extremely multicultural, and many people who live in Australia come from those regions. And so I think as much as we are thinking about our own communities and our own places, and recognizing that our friends and neighbours may be in different places on their own journey when they're understanding LGBTIQ issues or even racial issues, that we're also part of this global society. And in that space, our responsibility to the Asia Pacific region as well, I think, thinking about who we are as people in Adelaide, as people in different suburbs around Adelaide, and then sort of pulling that out as well as who are we as Australians, and what role do we need to play in this region. And I think in this region we can play a role of recognising, I guess, some of that history that's happened in Asia and South Asia and Eastern Asia, and being leaders, and also like welcoming queer people from from all over the world as well. I mean, I'm kind of going a bit of a tangent now, but it's known that so many people come here seeking asylum or seeking refuge because they are no longer able to be queer in their countries. So I think thinking as well about how we accept and what our processes are around people who are queer and who are seeking asylum could be one way that we can look at how we break that silence.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you, Neha. I'll move on to our next guest in a second, but just before I do, I've been having a quick look at a couple of the comments that have come through. Just to clarify, so you can submit a question via the Q&A function. That'll pop up for myself and for the panelists, and we'll be answering those shortly. The Zoom chat is disabled at this stage. We'll pop in like contact details and a few key things as we go along. But if you've been trying to type anything in the chat, we're not seeing anything there. But if you submit something via the Q&A, we will see that. So moving on to our next speaker. So Sarah K. Rees is many things. And again, I've jotted down some notes to try and remember even half of them. An artist, a writer, a poet, blogger, a mental health, disability and diversity activist, a peer mentor, a speaker and a trainer, to name just a few. Sarah is an incredibly talented individual and someone who identifies both as part of the queer community, but also has lived experience of adversity and mental health problems. My knowledge of Sarah, a little bit of a personal story here. My knowledge of Sarah just recently has involved some advocacy in the disability space. So before I jump into that big question of what does breaking the silence mean, Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds exhausting just listening to that list, Matthew. So yes, at the moment, one of the things I'm doing is I work in the disability space supporting people with NDIS plans, and I've been involved now for about a month in a really tricky situation with somebody who is like me, queer, non-binary, and has a number of different disabilities and diversities that just basically mean that they have access barriers everywhere across the board. And it's been so incredibly difficult to get them basic resources during COVID in particular, but even in general, foods that they can eat that they're not allergic to, access to an ED department to get the tests that they need. We're bouncing into challenges around nobody understands their pronouns, or the people that understand their pronouns don't understand this particular health problem, or those that understand this health problem have never come across that allergy before and don't know how to deal with that. And it's like this one person is sort of beautifully summarizing some of the challenges we have when we're trying to discuss intersectionalism, where you're kind of allowed to be maybe 1 point removed from what we think of as normal. You know, you can be gay, but you can't be gay and need a wheelchair. You can need a wheelchair, but you can't have that and a hearing difficulty. Or there's this real limitation on our ideas around how diversity works that are causing some real problems. So I'm doing a campaign at the moment with that person where we're using the name Jay in public to protect their identity, and we're calling it Stand With Jay. And you're very welcome to look up my website. We'd love your support. Share information. We're having a lot of trouble in NDIS space at the moment. There are people dying from lack of access to appropriate resources, or from hideously inappropriate resources, or from just being abandoned. Jay is still with us, but it's not easy, and we do need help and support, definitely.
Thank you for that. And I'm just sharing contact details so people can check out your website in the chat. I'll also share the details for Democracy in Colour in a moment. I forgot to do that before. But Sarah, so sticking with that theme of breaking the silence, now I'm going to preempt that I'm expecting you'll talk about them in regards to people living with a disability, but please feel free to answer it in any way you like. How do we break the silence for diverse parts of our community?
I don't think we do anything for anyone. I think we make it safe for people to step into spaces where they can break their own silence as they choose to. And part of that's about recognizing that this multiness that agitates us when we have this idea of other and then one form of diversity is actually normal. We are all more than one thing, and we all belong to more than one community. Diversity isn't a special separate thing, and it doesn't make some of us extra weird or extra difficult or special snowflakes if we have more than one form of diversity that isn't currently very well handled by our culture. We all have a range of ways that we fit and don't fit, and that's totally normal. And we often don't even notice them if those communities are reasonably well aligned and none of them are threatened by our membership with each other. It's only when we have issues like what Neha was describing, where there's this tension of, but what are you really? And you have to pick a side, or you're only allowed so many of them, that we have people under terrible pressure to pick what they're willing and allowed to show of themselves in different settings and what we will cater for. So in the disability community, historically, we've had a lot of trouble with the idea that people with disabilities are real people that have normal human needs, and that might include sex and relationships and love, or a desire to have children and things like that. So the queer community, which has often been kind of hypersexualized and seen as only being about that, and the disability community that has only fairly recently even the idea that it's a safe and appropriate thing to provide sex education that's tailored for people with disabilities, they've kind of been really kept apart in a long way. And yet disability, like anything else, it's not a separate static state. It's something that can happen to anyone at any point of their life. It might not, unlike the current thinking of the NDIS, be permanent. For many of us, we go through periods of life where we need extra assistance for different things, and then we get over various things, or our status changes over time and we might need more or less. But disability is a normal part of human life, and diverse experiences of sexuality or gender are also a normal part of human life, and they're not necessarily as static labels as they've been made out to be, or that they've needed to be presented as at times to gain rights. So being able to kind of shift this perspective into diversity is normal, and instead of creating spaces where that's a disability space and this is the people without it space, and that's the queer space and this is the people without it space, and that's being able to go, anybody with a disability should be able to access any queer resource that they want to, any peer event, any celebration, we need to be thought of and included in the community. People with disabilities are also ethnically diverse. People with disabilities and people who are queer also experience issues of chronic illness that don't often get counted as disability, but definitely fall under that heading when you look at, we have access needs, we have difficulties with employment and things like that. So being able to kind of reframe that, I think, is really invaluable. And the more we can recognize that this isn't unusual and that you're not being difficult to have more than one thing about you that is different, can help tremendously in allowing people to break the silence. So for me, I'm a very public blogger, and I've been blogging since 2011. And it's been really interesting because that process for me has been about breaking silences across different sectors and settings over time. And I keep reaching this point of thinking, okay, I'm done now. I've got nothing more to come out about. We've done all the big ones. And a month ago, discovered that I'm probably autistic, and went, you gotta be kidding me. Like, it's just, what do you mean I got a whole nother thing? And then looking back, that's not very surprising, to be honest, for anybody that knows me. But for me, going, I've already done freaking queer, and queer was the short version, right? I had to do bi/pan and then kind of go, oh, and gender stuff, oh, and plural, because that's the only way that long list at the beginning of this makes any sense. I'm a person that's plural, which means that my consciousness is a little bit different from how most people experience life, and I experience it with a number of different other selves that I share my body and my mind with. In my community, the plural community, the multiple community, or the DID community, depending on how they're framing things, this kind of diversity is normal. We're used to having a range of different skills and abilities and interests and capacities. And it's been interesting to me to notice that for us, we're grappling with things where everybody else is still kind of trying to stick to a very solid definition. And we're kind of going, my group identity is bi because I have people in my system that are asexual, that are straight, that are gay, and that are bi. And the only way I could kind of neatly group that to not have to have a really long conversation when somebody says, oh, how do you identify, was to kind of put that under a bracket that was as broad as I could. That means that for me to function, I've had to come to grips with a level of diversity that as a community, we're still trying to come to grips with and go, this is okay. And this is just how we function. And that's partly what brought me into diversity work and into this space, and to go, it was really scary for me to come out as bi, and I waited until I was 29 and several people didn't know where I lived, and somebody that I'd really loved had died and wasn't there to be heartbroken about it. It was really easy for me to come out as having mental health problems. I was really comfortable and familiar in that space. It was terrifying to come out as having physical disabilities because they weren't often believed. And the particular ones I have are the ones where people are like, well, everyone feels tired all the time, right? You just need to get some more sleep or some sunlight, or have you tried exercise or yoga? Or... That was terrifying. It's really scary to go, there's days where I cannot function. I cannot do those things. And it's not that I'm not trying hard enough. I found that much scarier to break the silence on than I did on going, occasionally I have psychoses and they're quite strange, and here's some photographs of the art I did in my last one. And we've all got our barriers of what's easy to share and what's hard to share. And they're all about safety. And they're all about who is going to try and shut us out of their community if we signal that we actually belong to this other one as well. Is it okay to be queer and a wheelchair user? Is it okay to be asexual and deaf? Is it okay, you know, does anybody know what that means? Is it okay to join both of those people, both of those communities? So the more we make it okay and normal that people have more than one identity and more than one label, and that labels change, and that that's all right, and that none of these things have to contradict each other, that you can be madly into cowboys, that you can be anything that breaks any stereotype, and you can also fit the stereotypes, and that's fine too, that you are allowed to wear, you are allowed to be a person of faith and a person who is queer, you are allowed to move in and out of these spaces without shame and without fear that you're going to get trapped in one or locked out of the other. Then the more people are able to be themselves with who they are and what they are, and the less there needs to be silence to protect folks who are at the moment some of the most vulnerable members of our community. And they are the people who sit on the intersections of marginalised communities, or the people who are perceived to. So suicide rates, for example, which are horrifying in most of these spaces, some of the highest and worst are for people who are not, for example, gay, but who are perceived to be. They get all the downsides of the bullying and none of the upsides of the sense of peer group and acceptance. We can address that. That's very much something that we can do, because whilst we all madly need allies, we are all, no matter how marginalised or diverse we may be, we are all also called on to be allies to each other. And that's our dual role and responsibility. That's our right and responsibility. And in this world, wherever we sit and whatever memberships we have to different clubs, make sure that those memberships can always be dual. You are allowed to be this and that, whatever those things are. And support people to not need to keep any of them secret. That's very much my take on this.
Thank you, Sarah. And there are so many points I could touch on there, but the one that I'm going to pick out really quickly before we move on to our final panelist is the point you make around, well, one, it's possible to belong to, if you like, different clubs at the same time, but also that it's important for us to really ensure that the LGBTIQ community, for example, is inclusive of people with different experiences and of diversity. And we're not just some amorphous blob where we're all the same. And we all know that very well, but it's important for us to make that space. It's important as well for the organisations that are supporting us to be aware of that. And one of the things that we were contacted about just in the last week or so is the NDIA, the National Disability Insurance Agency, are looking at ways that they can really be doing better in this space. So I'm going to pop a message about that in the chat. And if there are any attendees today who are either living with disability themselves or a carer for someone or work in this space, and you've got ideas about how services, disability services can be improved, the NDIA want to be hearing from you. So I've just popped that in the chat there for people to be able to follow up with if you want to, and we can provide more information and help you connect if need be. But thank you so much.
Also part of a working group on that topic. So yeah, we're very aware that these two groups are not well being supported at this point, and I'd be really happy to hear anything around that as well. And I can take that back to that working group that's part of Equality Australia.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. So I'll move us on to our final panelist. So as a reminder to our audience, we'll be coming back for the Q&A shortly. Several questions have come through, but one of the comments that was made was about thinking that we'd be able to see everyone at once. We've got, at the moment, over 60 people in the call, so unfortunately, this was the easiest way to keep it simple. But there is that chance to submit questions via the Q&A. And this is me just talking on the fly now, but if people want to hang around and have a chat afterwards, once we finish the webinar, I'm happy to stay and have a conversation with people, and our other panelists may be able to do so as well. Without further ado, though, I'll introduce our final panelist, Zach Cannell. Now, Zach, again, is many things, so I'm going to have to read for my introduction to Zach. Zach is an out and proud bisexual trans man. He co-founded and co-facilitates Transmasc SA, operates the Trans Health SA website, is co-admin for FTM Australia, is a sexual health counsellor for Shine SA, is a peer worker for Shine SA's Gender Wellbeing Service, and holds the current Mr. Adelaide Leather title for Adelaide Leather and Fetish. Zach is also a Master Youth Mental Health First Aid instructor, that's a mouthful, and a public speaker / educator in the areas of sexuality and gender diversity. Zach has a history of political and community advocacy and a passion for promoting human rights of marginalised and oppressed groups. He holds a Bachelor of Social Work with honours, is mere weeks away from completing his Masters in Mental Health Practice, and hopes to go on to complete a PhD in the area of gender diverse wellbeing, because clearly you don't have enough under your belt already, Zach. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, where to begin? I might just throw open to you. What would you like to share with the audience today?
Where to start? Well, first of all, I would like to pay my respects to the Kaurna people. I acknowledge that I'm speaking today and speaking with you all on the traditional lands of the Kaurna culture. I acknowledge that treaty has not been signed and sovereignty has never been ceded. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to also acknowledge those from other nation groups, and a special acknowledgement to those who are on that intersectionality of being part of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, as well as being of the Rainbow community as well. To the folks at SARAA, thanks for popping this together, and also to our AUSLAN interpreters, being able to have the ability to be able to connect with those who otherwise might not have been able to is awesome. I hope that everyone is staying safe. We are in a really quite tricky health climate at the moment, and I know that for many of our rainbow friends and family, this means that for some of us, they've been put in really complicated situations with home lives, and I know that for others, you know, this has given an opportunity to reflect on what they need when they come out of whatever this looks like. But yeah, it's also meant that for many of us, we've created new ways of being able to connect, and, you know, being able to use forums like this has meant that, you know, I've been able to join groups and chat with people all over the globe, you know, whereas on a Saturday night, I might catch up with some friends or, you know, spend some time with the family. I've been able to do that, but also invite, you know, people from all over the globe. So it's definitely had a few areas where we've been able to take some positives from this situation. I guess my side of things, I mean, Transmasc SA is probably one of the biggest areas that takes up quite a bit of my time, and I couldn't do the work that I do without my amazing co-facilitators, and also to Sean Miller, who helped found the group nearly 4 years ago now. For those who aren't familiar with what we are and what we do, it's a group that meets regularly at Samesh's Hyde Street office that's also shared with Shine SA, and and a number of other amazing LGBTIQA plus health services. It's a group for anyone who was assigned or presumed female at birth but doesn't identify as such. So that's everyone from the AFAB, transmasculine, non-binary, trans men. It's a really diverse and eclectic group of people. It's a confidential sort of social support, psychosocial well-being group where we promote social connectedness and just trying to engage community and support and care for one another. We've got a private Facebook page. There's there's nearly 350 people in that space. We've got nearly 200 who have registered as in person, having attended, and we've got, I think, coming up to close to 650 likes on our public page as well, which for a small unfunded community group is just incredible. That in itself to me is breaking the silence and being visible. Yeah, where would you like me to go from here, Matt? I can talk about a lot of things.
You can. I guess one of my areas of interest, there seems to have been a lot more visibility around the trans and gender diverse community, I would argue, over the last 5 to 10 years, and it continues to be on the increase. So some people might say that breaking the silence for the trans community may not be as important as it would be for some of the other parts of the community we've heard from today. But I suspect there are a lot of issues that still need to be unpacked and spoken about more. At the moment in South Australia, do you feel like there's a particular issue that we need to be breaking the silence about?
Yeah, I think you've made a good point. Trans and gender diverse health and well-being and just visibility in general has come a very long way. I remember when I first came out, there was very, very little. It felt very isolating, and it felt very lonely. But it's not about, which community group is, dealing more or seeing more. We're all in this together. And I think we saw that during the Yes campaign that, it didn't matter which letter of the alphabet you came from, we were there for one another. And there was a lot of fear when, the Yes vote came back that that would mean that one section of the alphabet no longer would be there as much for the others. And that hasn't been the case, thankfully. When we look at South Australia and we look at trans health nationally, there is a number of things that are still outstanding. We know that marriage equality isn't entirely accurate when, being able to change your birth certificate in some states means that you are still required to have surgery. Essentially, you need to be surgically castrated in order to change your birth certificate and have your authentic self recognized legally. We know that, here in South Australia, we were able to do some amazing advocacy work, which I was really privileged and honoured to be a part of, that, we stood in Parliament and we told those who were essentially holding the power that I shouldn't need to have surgery. When I changed my gender marker, I had to have chest surgery, which I wanted anyway, but that was another story. But that meant that I needed to find $10,000 because it's considered a cosmetic procedure. It meant that I needed to have letters signed off by psychiatrists to state that I am who I say I am and I am of sound mind. But I then had to stand in front of a judge who didn't know me, had no idea what my background was or what my history was, just to be able to be said, yes, you can be the man that you say you are on a piece of paper. That still doesn't happen in other states. But we also know that even just being able to access some of those health services is incredibly difficult because healthcare in this state and in this country doesn't cater for the LGBTIQA plus community. One of the things that I do, and I take great privilege in being able to do so, is I work with local universities and with local health bodies to be able to go, okay, this is what it means to be trans and gender diverse. This is the language that we really need you to use. We don't necessarily need you to understand, but please just have empathy with us as we're coming here and we're exposing and being vulnerable. We're asking for help. At a federal level, being able to access hormone therapy for testosterone is still required to be it's a restricted substance. So there's only specific doctors who can even authorize a prescription for that, which means that if doctors have their own requirements in place, you have to meet those needs. It's essentially, for some, seen as gatekeeping. It means that we don't have, at university education or TAFE education level, the depth of information being provided to those who are there to help us, and those who do want to help us, they don't know how. So breaking the silence isn't just about us as a community being visible and us as a community being able to step into spaces. It's being invited to the party, and it's being told that yes, you are wanted, you are welcomed, and you are celebrated, but it's being invited. And if we don't have that ability, it is silencing. And if you're part of an intersectionality, if you're part of, another minority group on top of that, where there's additional layers, it's just pushing a person further and further back. So when I think of the work that we can do here in South Australia, when I think of the work that our allies can do, and what those who are in positions of privilege of being able to do that advocacy work, we need to be being able to go, okay, we need to work together, but we need our allies more importantly, because we need them to be able to go, okay, these are the areas where I can help. Please recognize your position of privilege and power and help uplift and promote those who need it. That includes the trans and gender diverse community. That includes the intersex community significantly. That includes those living with disabilities and differing abilities. That includes our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and our First Nations. It includes our people of colour, migrants, refugees, those living in state care. There's so many groups. It's our elderly, it's our young. Please, it's not hard to do if you just give yourself an opportunity to acknowledge and recognise your privilege.
Thank you so much for that, Zach. Very powerful comments. And I think it is really important. It's been a theme that I think all three of our panelists have touched on, has been that importance of being a good ally. And for those who are in the audience, regardless of whether you identify as part of the LGBTIQ plus community or not, we're all allies in our own ways, whether that's being an ally in regards to racial justice, or as a cisgender person like myself, being an ally to the trans and gender diverse community. And even as you were saying, Zach, about all the other parts of the community to be allies as well. So thank you for sharing those thoughts. Now, I'm going to open us up for the Q&A with the questions that have been coming through. First question I'm going to ask was one which was submitted in advance. And a reminder to people, do put in those questions via the Q&A function in Zoom. But the first question that was asked was for you, Zach. And the question is, what is being done to ensure that trans and intersex people who are being placed in the remand centre are not being discriminated against? And this was in particular looking at for trans women and for intersex women who are potentially being placed in the AUSLAN men's prison, despite being marked as female on their birth certificate. Do you know what's currently being done, or alternatively, what do you think needs to be done in this space?
This is a really complicated one, and it's an area where I have spoken on a couple of different occasions with different persons across both the corrections services directly and also the ministers and their aides. It's an area where, unfortunately, there's a lot of variable factors that they take into account. And when I say they, I mean our governing bodies and the corrections teams. They take into account where an individual is in their transition. Are they already having commenced hormone therapy, if that was their journey? Have they legally changed their gender marker and name? Versus, is this someone who has made the decision to disclose their identity whilst in corrections for the first time? There is no short answer. The corrections services team and the South Australian government team do acknowledge that it is important that we protect the welfare of our prison population. It's not an answer that I think we have a clarity of. The population, I don't know at this point in time. We do have a number of gender diverse persons who are currently in services, and I know that a couple of those have been placed in protective care because there has been incidents that have occurred. I know that we've got a couple who are saying it's easier to not be publicly disclosing my identity. Yeah, what I would like to see, unfortunately, yeah, it's complicated. I know that if I myself was incarcerated, I don't know how I'd feel being placed in a men's facility, but I absolutely wouldn't feel comfortable in a women's facility, nor would I want to make any of the women that are there uncomfortable because I'm a man. It's a difficult one. I know that when we talk about, okay, let's pop people in, out of general population and into, isolation or into a segregated area, there's no easy answer for that. We know that isolation, we're all dealing with it in different ways at this point in time, and it's not great for mental health. But safety is also a really complicated answer when you talk about, what does that look like in a prison setting? I wish I had a clearer answer. When it comes to my conversations at this point with different inmates and with those in corrective services at a position of power, it's case by case. And yeah, there is occasions where they get it wrong. Absolutely.
Thank you, Zach. And I think it's one of those things, again, one of those other diverse voices is for the LGBTIQ plus community who are incarcerated, and how do we ensure that their voices are heard as well. The next question that we have is one which is for the whole panel. So I'll do a bit of a whip around, but the question is, how do you think that members of the LGBTIQA+ community and allies can help empower and lift up the more marginalised members of our community? And this is something that each of our speakers has touched on to varying degrees. Neha, I'll go to you first. How can members of our communities and our allies help to empower and lift up more marginalised members of the community?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad someone asked it. I think there's a few things we can do. To start with, if you're running an event or if you're bringing together any sort of queer gathering, thinking about who is and isn't in the room, and maybe also thinking about why. So, for example, if particularly before COVID-19, so many of our events would take place in bars or in the evenings or in the city, like places like Mary's Poppin in Adelaide, which is, it plays such an important role, but it's also one of the few places that I know that I can go to if I were living in the regions, or if I was still living with my parents, or just like any, if you have a disability, there are so many barriers to accessing some of these spaces. And so thinking about, okay, well, what's normal for you? Who is part of that normal? And then who else in the community is being left out? Who else needs to be in this room? What are we doing to bring them here? And then I would say as well is to be careful as well about tokenizing or being, kind of the other side where you feel so guilty and you feel so bad about maybe your white privilege or maybe your cis privilege or whatever else. And just kind of acknowledging that as well, that like you will have these feelings. I get it. Everybody else gets it as well when you kind of go, oh no, I didn't know about that, or I didn't realize that. Now I feel guilty and now I'm having some feelings about this. And you just got to kind of acknowledge that those feelings will happen. If someone tells you that what you've done isn't inclusive, that's okay. You'll work hard to improve it next time, take their feedback on board and really listen. Like really, that work happens when you listen, you acknowledge, you find out what you can do to do better next time, and then you do what you can to improve it next time. And often that can involve maybe bringing some of those people on board who offered that feedback and saying, okay, well, what would you like to do? How can we do this together?
Thanks for that. And just touching on that final point, I think it is important for us to acknowledge that we're not going to get it right all the time, every time, and to actually be comfortable with being uncomfortable and to learn from the mistakes that we make. Now, Sarah provided a written response in regards to this question. In a nutshell, though, it was find and follow the community leaders in those groups and back their ideas. Would you like to expand upon that really quickly, Sarah? I'm mindful of time, so I'll sort of maybe limit it to about 30 seconds, but if you can expand on your thoughts.
I think one of the things that's useful to consider is that there isn't one right. So, and I'm sure Jason will touch on this in a bit, there isn't one right, because inclusion is specific to different groups. So what's the most inclusive environment for one group can be the worst environment for another group. So it's not a case of trying to get it right, as if we can somehow get this magical inclusive space that everybody can meet in. It's about recognizing who in your environment needs access and then facilitating that. If you've got nobody that needs an interpreter, don't spend your budget on an interpreter. If you've got somebody that needs an interpreter, spend your budget on an interpreter. So it is actually case by case. Case by case isn't like what we do when the policy fails. Good policy, good HR is case by case. This is, well, what does that person need for access? Let's make that happen for them. There's no point setting up stuff to be right to a group that don't need or want access to what you're doing. And we'd quite like you just to help fund the thing that they're already doing. Thank you very much. So it's not right. It's right for the people that you're reaching out to, and thinking about, as Nita said, who's not in this room that wants to be, help them get in it. That's your thing. That's what's right.
Thank you for that. The next question we had was, what needs to happen with the education and training for healthcare workers to enable them to better engage with the LGBTIQ+ community to ensure the community's needs are understood and met? And now that's a big question, and I think anyone on the panel could answer it. But Zach, you touched a little bit on education yourself when you spoke earlier. Do you want to give some quick thoughts?
Probably the first thing is nothing for us without us. So when we are looking at training and education, consult with the community. So I know that in trans and gender diverse health, for example, there's a fantastic new website that ACON has just put together, transhub.org.au, which I honestly, I can't speak highly enough of it. It's a really good resource. It encompasses everything for parents and families through to health practitioners and clinicians. And it's written by trans people. We have a peak professional board, the Australian Professional Association for Transgender Health. Consult with them. We have people in this space who are also professionals, as well as those with lived experience. Talk with them. When we look at what education looks like, I've got several friends of mine at the moment who are, at university, and they're doing, different degrees, and when they've come to their specialised week on LGBTIQA+ health and well-being, it's so out of date. We've got a textbook that was being used that still mentions the word hermaphrodite instead of intersex. When that's being promoted as the current level, that's really not okay. And it clearly hasn't been written by someone who has a queer lens. Promoting health services, talk with the community. It's really not that hard. There are people who can do it, and there are people who want to do it.
Thank you, Zach. I'm going to stick with you for 1 second, because the next question I feel is right up your alley as well. Are you aware of any best practice, either in Australia or internationally, regarding the treatment and support of trans and gender diverse prisoners?
To be honest, I don't. I don't think that there is anything that I've come across. We have the World Professional Association for Trans Health. They currently set a lot of the guidelines when it comes to healthcare and well-being. There's also the US Professional Association, the Australian Professional Association, and the New Zealand Autor Association. It's complicated. Each region has their own guidelines. I haven't seen anything that's considered best practice specifically to those who are in custodial settings. But yeah, if anyone can put me in the direction, I'd be happy to update. But as far as I know, everything is currently assessed at a government level on a case-by-case basis by the Ministers for Corrections and the owners of the facilities.
Thank you for that. Now, we had a couple of questions come through that are very youth focused, and I might try and merge them together into a bit of a Frankenstein question. So one of the questions was, what do you each think the state and federal governments can be doing to protect LGBTIQA+ young people in schools? And the other question was, the voice of young people, particularly those under 18, are often not heard at the best of times. We need to hear these voices more, so how do we ensure their voice is heard through policy change, etc.? So sort of melding those two together, and I might sort of start with Neha and we'll work through the panel, but what do we need to be doing in schools to support young people, and how do we also ensure that young people's voices are heard?
That's another great question. I think one solution to this is safe schools, or a program that's like safe schools, if we, for political reasons, can't necessarily call it that anymore. But I have to say, like, I went to high school in the noughties, which I believe was still certainly better than going to high school, you know, in the 90s or the 80s. And our queer sex ed, or just queer ed, was my year 9 PE teacher showing a video of 2 boys in a swimming competition. One of them had HIV and one of them got discriminated against, and that was our queer education. Obviously, it's not good enough. And as well, there was rampant homophobia throughout school. A lot of kids really struggled to come out, myself included. And when we did try and talk to us about our teachers, one teacher, when I complained to her and took her aside to talk about homophobia that I was experiencing, simply said that so-and-so doesn't know what he's doing, and you should just accept that he is who he is, and that, you know, there's nothing that we can do about it. And I think that that's just not good enough. I think that there's a lot that schools can do, but I think schools need to be supported by state governments and federal governments to do that, and that we do need to be looking at this through a health lens, through a mental health lens. Let's do what we can to depoliticize these issues and make this simply about education and health.
Thank you for that. Really important point there about depoliticizing it, and at the end of the day, what we are talking about here are the lives of young people. Sarah, did you have any thoughts about those two questions? So how do we ensure that the voices of young people are heard, and how do we look after young people in schools?
Oh, the big topics for sure. I was terribly badly bullied at school, and I think one of the things that I find most challenging when we start talking about this is that we tend to want to look for a single solution to a complex problem. And even most of the materials out there, not all, but a lot of the materials out there, they treat bullies as if all bullies are a single human being, and they treat people that are being bullied as if we're all single human beings. And I've just not experienced that. Bullying is complex. People bully for many different reasons. And the bullies alone that hassled me, some of them are lovely human beings in different circumstances. Some of them are sadists. Some of them were being beaten up by their older brother, or sexually abused by their father, or had all kinds of other crap going on. Bullying is complex. So one of the things I think that's just critical is exploring what safety actually looks like in schools, and considering what our schools are actually for. So when we've got bullying and we're talking about it, we tend to focus on kids, and yet I can tell you now that most of the teachers I talk to are stressed, very, very, very stressed. And that when you ask them questions that look at, you know, the HR kind of questions that look at psychological well-being at work, how safe they feel, how supported they feel, those numbers aren't good. And then when you start looking at teachers that themselves are on some kind of marginalised intersection, whether they're queer or black or whatever, those numbers get a hell of a lot worse. And we go, how are these people under these conditions supposed to be leading the charge for making spaces safe for vulnerable young people? That's a really difficult thing to be asking of anybody, much less folks that themselves aren't really experiencing much of it. So to me, the questions are complex and the answers are systemic. That doesn't mean they're necessarily complex, but it does mean that they think bigger picture than one program. I thought that the Safe School program had a hell of a lot going for it, but I did spend a ridiculous amount of time online trying to explain what it wasn't to people who were really, really frightened of it. Often good people who were really frightened of it and who thought it might be harming their kids. And I spent quite a lot of time trying to explain to the queer community that we needed these resources, not just for queer kids, but for mainstream kids that weren't queer, or for kids that other other kids thought were queer but weren't, because the goal here isn't the protection of one marginalised group and ignoring everyone else. It's actually that every kid has the right to feel safe all the time, at school, at home, with each other, whether they've got glasses, whether they're gay, whether they're not sure what the heck they are yet. All of these things are not supposed to be, there shouldn't be a validated diversity that gets all the attention. All of these kids are awesome, and all of them need to feel okay and comfortable, and like school is a space that actually cares about them, and they can't get that when their teachers don't feel that either. So yeah, I think a lot of this is about moving away from that very post-industrial approach to, we are here to create workers that function as cogs in machines, and recognising that learning happens best in environments not just where people feel safe, but when they feel excited, when there's play, when there's pleasure, that kids are wired to learn, that they're wired to take risks, that they're wired to explore, and that these aren't things that should be kind of a stress in a school environment. These are things that schools should be built around, and that teachers are wired to teach. They love these folks, generally speaking, and they want to be in there doing good things, but the structures that we've created don't at this point support that and sustain that. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
No, thank you for it. I'll throw to Zach very quickly as well. We've got time probably for one more question after this, so if there are any other burning questions that people want to ask, now is the time to get them in. But Zach, I'm going to pose this question slightly differently for you. So for trans and gender diverse young people, surprise, they exist. A lot of people have this mentality that we're talking about adolescents, people who are 13, 14, 15 plus, but for trans and gender diverse young people, we can be talking about a younger cohort. How do we ensure that the voices for trans and gender diverse young people, in this case we could be talking children rather than just adolescents, are heard, and that schools are safe for them as well?
Great question. There's some amazing groups who are doing work in this area already. You know, chat with the folks at Parents of Gender Diverse Children, chat with the folks at Transcend. They're doing some amazing work in supporting their kids. We've got teachers who are already going above and beyond in doing work in this area with their kids. I, as part of my role with Shine SA, I get to answer all of the questions that come in. And just the other week, I had a parent of a 3.5-year-old who made contact. And, you know, it's one of those things where people are going, but how can they know from that young an age? And this is the thing, is that kids do. But we as adults, we go, well, they're not old enough to know, or, you know, it's normal for kids to explore. And yeah, it is. There are kids who, you know, think that they're T-Rexes. But when we're talking about things that are consistent and things that don't change, and when they're causing such distress, what does it hurt to go, okay, you wear the uniform at school that makes you feel comfortable, or okay, you want me to use a different name or a different set of pronouns? Just do it. It's not costing you anything to show a young person, to show a child that you value and that you care enough about them to go, okay, I'll respect that. If it changes next week, so be it. It's only an inconvenience if you let it be. We talk with children about everything else. We ask them what they want for lunch. Why not go, okay, if you want me to use a different name and pronouns, or if you want to go, okay, you want to wear a pair of shorts instead of a skirt, or you want to wear the skirt instead of the shorts, go nuts. It's not harming anybody else. We talk about working with children. You know, Helen Connolly, the Commissioner for Children and Young People, has done some great work in going and chatting with local youth groups and organisations. It's just about going to meet young people at where they are. It's not rocket science. Chat with kids. They'll tell you.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you mentioned about the work that the Commissioner has been doing. I think it is incredibly important really to be listening to the stories and to the voices of the people who we're talking about. And that has very much been a theme that all of our panelists have mentioned. Right, we might have one last, two comments thanking our panelists for answering those combined questions. Unless there are any other questions, I think it's actually probably a good time to move on to our final speaker, which I'll do in a second. But first of all, to all of our panelists, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your knowledge and your thoughts with us. And thank you to all those amazing questions that came through. Hopefully those answers have been useful for you in the audience. Let me now introduce our final guest speaker for today. So Jason Toison McShane is the founder of the Equality, I nearly said Equality Australia. No, the Equality Project, and also Purple Bombers. So the fan group for the Aston Bombers LGBTIQ fan base. With the Equality Project, though, Jason, you do some amazing things, in particular, both leadership training, but also the Better Together conference. And given that Better Together is coming to Adelaide next year, I thought it would be a brilliant opportunity for you to share a little bit about some of the work that you're doing in general. Tell us about Better Together. Tell us about the Equality Project. Tell us about the wonderful things you do.
Thanks, Matt. That's very kind. It's lovely to be here and to have listened for the last hour and a half to a pretty good conversation. I just think back to 1990 when, before we were taking off the mental health illness list, which forms IDAHOBIT Day. I was 20. I was in the closet. I was in a Christian environment, and there was no way forward for me to be myself. And to think that some 30 years later, I could, be a part of a conversation like this and be involved with such beautiful people as yourselves. And I looked at the attendee list, and I probably know half of you personally. It's just, it's quite an amazing, really, thing to have this conversation on this day, and to recognise we've come a long way in a very short time. And Sarah sort of intimated to it. So Better Together National LGBTIQA+ conference is coming to Adelaide for the first time in January, to the Adelaide Convention Centre on the 15th and 16th of January. I'm really, really excited about this. I'm confident that it's all proceeding as planned, with restrictions being lifted slowly, that by January we'll be fine. And we're expecting somewhere between 600 and 1,000 people from hopefully all over Australia, and some international guests to come and have that conversation. And across all the intersections, I know many of you have been to a Better Together in either Melbourne or Sydney or Canberra, and it's quite an extraordinary thing to, face to face, look each other in the eye and see the wonderful diversity that is our spaces. We are not one community. We are a bunch of whole different communities. And it's not easy to create that space. It's not easy to meet everybody's needs. And it's certainly, when you look each other in the eye, it encourages, collaboration and connection and relationships. And I'm kind of thinking, after what we've been through this year and what's going to happen for the rest of the year, that we'll be pretty hungry for a face-to-face gathering where we can, touch base with each other and hopefully hug each other, maybe not, but, have this experience. So this year at Better Together, we're 4 main streams, which proposals opened for last week. So anyone can apply to be part of one of the sessions. The Equality Project is we're 3.5 years old. We are the scaffolding and the logistics behind the conference. Every session, every speaker self-determines their input, and we're pretty excited about that. And there's some new themes, or some major themes we're having for the first time for Adelaide. First is a SAGE stream. So that's our seniors, or our older, which I'm now one, turning 50 the other week, people. And we're going to have conversations about, aging, aged care, visibility, empowerment. And Karen Fredrickson-Gelson from the west coast of the USA is coming, one of the leading researchers in that space. So that's one of the streams. We're going to have an intentional friends and allies stream, that basically, if you're not LGBTIQ+, you can come to Better Together and go to a session on both days that is tailored towards you and helping you understand who we all are, and safely allowing you to, become a better friend. And the other 2 major areas are culture and health. So, which covers everything from people of faith, people of colour, asylum seekers, people who are deaf, people with disability, younger, older, every single issue in our spaces, from sex work to intersex issues to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander persons. The space is there at this conference for all of those conversations to be had, and they may not be comfortable, but we will create a space that we take care of each other, that we respect each other. And it's really important to understand that we're all different and there's no one way to be queer. And I worry that we have these unofficial police that say this is the only way you can be one of, the LGBTIQA plus spaces in Australia. And so we're really excited about that. One of the things that we're offering is, hopefully you can see this. I can't see the picture of myself, but here's a code that if you type 50BT 2021 into the early bird registrations page for Better Together, you can get $50 off. And I wanted to make sure that everyone here had access to that. The one thing that we do, we're really the equity project, is that anyone who wants a scholarship, who needs one, can attend one. So instead of paying full price, it's $69 and all you have to do is apply. It's not you just got to give us your information so we can send you information. But we worked out that almost 40% of our attendees come on scholarships. And so there's no shame in that. The whole point is everyone who wants to be there should be there. The other thing we're doing, hope I'm not talking too much, Matt, is we're having a pre-conference day for the second time. Last year we have caucuses. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, people of colour, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander, people who are deaf, and others. Caucuses we have are discussions for each of those spaces that are led by those people. And what we did for the first time was our transgender and gender diverse non-binary day was the day before, and we're doing that again, and UCity are hosting that for us. But we're also going to have people with a disability and Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander pre-conference caucus day or half days available on the 14th of January in the heart of the CBD, and that's really exciting as well. Really excited about this. It's going to be really good. I hope you're all doing okay. This has been a really tough time for all of us. We launched the conference with 200 people at with the Lord Mayor, which was wonderful. I think it was 4 days before lockdown happened. And it was just wonderful to see you all. You're a wonderful space there in South Australia, and I love being with you all. I find you nourishing and inspiring, and getting together and having this space after having months of being isolated, I think is going to be even more important than ever. And we're going to take care and try, and it's not easy. I agree with you, Sarah. But the goal is to make it as nourishing, provide access to as many different people as possible, and have the conversations that we need to have, even if they're uncomfortable, because they're important. And that's what Better Together is about. And so early bird tickets are on sale right now. It's as cheap as you can get it. I think with that code, it's $99. Get your ticket now. The conference is happening. Get your proposal in. If you want to do a session, do a session. The only thing that there's those theme areas, but the only thing we really encourage is collaboration. So, work with someone else, have a session that's 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 people, or 1 or 2 or 3 organizations. And the other thing we're doing is we're bringing the National Training Academy to Adelaide in September, at the end of September, and we've got a 3-day piece actually, with Benjamin Law, a GLAD session. We've got Paige Burton from Equality Australia and Lara Husselby doing human-centered design from Sydney, and it's going to be a pretty amazing experience. And once again, scholarships are available. That information's on our website, and it's the first week of October, I think, is the Adelaide cohort. So yeah, it's really exciting work, Matt, and everyone. It's just a pleasure to listen and be there. I've been sad I haven't been able to travel to Adelaide the last 2 months like I normally get to. I can't wait for the borders to open that I can be there again with you all. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Jason. And one comment I'll make quickly before we start wrapping things up. Better Together really is about the attendees. I've gone the last 2 years and I've got so much out of being able to meet and connect with people from other states, and also South Australians who've attended, who I've had the chance to have some really candid conversations with. So my challenge is, let's really make Better Together 2021 amazing. And let's make sure we have a really great representation of our South Australian community there, so that we can have some of those conversations that are hard to have, but are incredibly important. And building on what we've been talking about today from all of our panelists, we are better together. And it's that matter of being allies and working together. So I really hope that that can shine through in the conference next year. Well, that just about brings us to a close for today. I've got 4 minutes left to quickly tell you some of the stuff that SARAA is working on and how you can contribute to it. So first of all, I want to say that if you want to join our mailing list, I've just popped the details in there. There is a Survey Monkey that you should receive in an email in the next day or so, but also via the link there to give feedback. This is our first time hosting an event like this. We're hoping it won't be the last event that we host. Maybe the last time on Zoom. We might go back to face-to-face. We'll see what happens, but we want your feedback. And if you want to be part of our mailing list to be kept in touch with what's happening, do jump onto it. In terms of the things that we're working on, so we've got some really exciting stuff happening at SARAA at the moment. Following up from what Jason was saying about Better Together, we will be providing scholarships with the support of the Department of Human Services to ensure that more South Australians are able to get to Better Together. In regards to SARAA, we are a completely voluntary group, so we do rely on sponsorships and donations to help us do things, and DHS have helped us out generously, with that funding to ensure that more South Australians can get there. Looking at other things we're doing, certainly there are big political issues that we're looking at, such as the Religious Discrimination Bill on a national level, but also looking at things here in South Australia. At the moment, we're looking at issues such as transgender healthcare. So some of the things that Zach was touching on around education for healthcare providers, etc. But we're also keen to be hearing from our community about what are the big issues and what do you think that SARAA should be doing. In that regard, if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us via chairsarah, SARAA, @gmail.com, and I'll pop those details into the chat as well in a moment. And we are also always happy to have a conversation, hence why at the end of today, I'll stay back and our panelists may do so as well, so you can have a chat with us if you would like to discuss anything further. I'm also really excited to be saying that once again, with the support of the Department of Human Services, we will be setting up a community advisory group in the months ahead. And what this will be doing is providing a chance for community members, together with the support of SARAA, to really be working out what are the big issues and feeding this information back to government. It's still very early days at this stage, so I can't tell you more just yet, but if you want to be kept in the loop, check us out on Facebook or sign up to that mailing list and we'll share information as it becomes available. For the moment though, I think we're just about done for today's event. So as some final comments, thank you once again to all of our speakers, to our panelists, to Michelle Lensink, MLC, Minister for Human Services, to Jason Toison-McShane. Thank you to Jack Buckskin for providing us with a welcome to country. And thank you very much to Jerry and Pip, our AUSLAN interpreters, for providing their support throughout the event as well. Finally, thank you all for attending, for being part of our audience, and for the wonderful questions that have come through. It has been amazing to be able to have this conversation, and a Q&A is only ever as good as the questions that are asked. So thank you so much. I'm going to close things off formally here, but as I said, I'll hang around and I'll see if I can tweak the settings here in Zoom so people can chat both in the chat and potentially via webcam if desired as well. So thank you again. Enjoy the remainder of IDAHOBIT. Thank you.